Hi everyone, I'm Mike and I'm a Chief Product and Technology Officer at the Scale Factory. I'm going to introduce myself properly in a second because first I would like to ask you all this question. So, who here is building anything with AI or planning to build any system with AI? It's a bit difficult, I am too. So I think most people have their hands up, and maybe those that have got their hands down are thinking, oh my gosh, another talk mentioning AI and audience participation, and it's late in the day. I will promise you that I will not do any more audience participation, but I may mention AI once or twice. But the sort of the main narrative from what I'm going to talk about today, the main story is not about AI. It's data strategy, and it's data strategy to deliver basically, and deliver on what objective you have as an organisation, what innovation you might want to drive, and that may be AI. So although I might refer to it, the crux of what I'm going to talk about today is building a data strategy. And the other thing that I'm going to talk about is a survey that we conducted. So I'm going to talk about some results from a survey. Now, some of you may have come across this. I think it was launched in the last couple of weeks. So we collaborated with CTO Craft, and we commissioned a survey earlier this year, and we collected the results from hundreds of technology leaders and CTOs about what barriers they're facing in taking AI POCs to production. And I'm going to use some of the insights from that survey today to show you, kind of demonstrate to you some of the challenges that are being faced here. A little bit about me, going back to sort of the introduction. I work for a technology consultancy called the Scale Factory. I've been with the organisation now for about 11 years, so a long time. We work with a wide range of organisations. A lot of the organisations that we work with are regulated, and we see a lot of challenges in that space with things like data. You know, how do you take your data and connect these to these systems without causing any issues, whilst remaining compliant and keeping it secure and so on. So here's a rough agenda. So I'm going to start off by just a quick kind of peek at the survey results. I've got a couple of interesting stats that I'm going to share with you, and then we'll dive into that and sort of see what that might, how those might be. And then look at the barriers to POC success. So building an AI POC or any kind of POC, what some of those barriers might be and how that connects to the survey results. Coming back to data strategy, I've got a few tips and a few things that you might be able to take away and take into the work that you're doing. And then right at the end, I've got a QR code on the screen and some more information about how you can get access to the full survey results if you're interested. Cool, so you ready? Here is the first question that we asked the respondents. POC success rate. So you can see here that, so this is the success of AI POCs going into production. And 67% have less than half success rate, which is pretty bad. It's not great at all. And you can see here, like 20% of respondents said that rarely have they had any of their AI POCs go to production. 47% sometimes. So maybe some of the use cases, some of the things that they're building make their way to production. Just over 20% often, and then just 12% nearly always. So it's quite astonishing, really, that 2/3 of POCs basically just don't, respondents said that their POCs don't make it to production. What we'll look at a bit later is what is underpinning the difference between like the people who have their POCs nearly, almost always go to production versus those rarely, and what the differences might be. One thing that that we sort of noticed when we looked at the data, and we've spoken to some organisations that we've worked with, is what I like to call the scale chasm. So this is something that we've observed. So you might start off with an idea Here's a use case. We've got really cool, I don't know, maybe there's a load of data, a load of reports, and you're going to feed it through a system and produce some summaries, right? So you've got this great idea, build a POC, and that POC starts with a subset of the data. And often that is handpicked, it's very carefully curated, doesn't contain any sensitive information, and it's very controlled. POC is built, prove the idea, it works, look at this, it's great, we can feed all this data in, and we get these great summaries out of the reports, fantastic. Now let's take it to production. And this is, what I would call the scale chasm. It's all of these challenges in taking that POC to production. And this is where, we see AI projects fail and what the survey results underpin as well. Things like data quality, compliance, or integration with third-party systems, these projects stall. And it might be that, the POC was running on data that was exported from a system manually, and now you need to have that done automatically or in some kind of semi-automated fashion, and that becomes the barrier and blocker. If you get beyond that chasm, then you can get into production. So sort of, this kind of time frame, really. And this is what I refer to as the scale chasm. Now, if we drill a little bit more into the chasm in the middle, let's have a look and see what themes popped up from the survey. So this is from the survey results. So in these barriers, the top one, security, privacy, and compliance. 26% of those POCs got stuck in that chasm, or stalled or failed because of that. That was the blocker. The next thing, 21%, data management, governance, and quality. So those two combined is nearly half of the reason for these POCs failing. Integration into existing systems, 17%. And then right at the bottom there, MLOps maturity, 15%. And I would say, so this, I'm talking about data strategy here. I say there's a theme between all of these, and that theme is data. So, some of these might have other reasons, integration into existing systems, then an API might not exist or something like that. But the way that I see this is a lot of this relates to the data security, the security of it, the privacy of data compliance. Do the POC on some carefully curated data, but actually when it comes to production, does that data contain PII? Do you know if it contains PII or not? And how do you work with it safely? And so these often become the blockers and barriers here. The next thing, data quality. Okay, the data's there, but is it a good enough quality to use? Is it accessible? Is it in the right format? What's the data governance? Can the data leave the country it resides in? So all of these become challenges and barriers here. And then continuing with that theme, integration APIs. Is it accessible? Is it available? Is it versioned, the data? And then the whole MLOps piece is the pipelines. Actually, okay, so we've got the data over here, and we need to get it over there to feed it into the system. Do we have a pipeline that is going to ensure the data gets there safely and meets all of these, really? So this is, those are the four barriers, but I think there's an underlying theme here of data for those. And if we look at that from another aspect, really, I think the way that I see this is almost like this kind of mismatch, really. And the reason why, right at the start, I said I might talk about AI and use it as an example, but this data strategy piece stands on its own is because I think we could all benefit from having, all of these things on the left here in the systems that we're building and operating and running without, AI aside. They're going to benefit the business generally. It's going to improve business intelligence and improve the way systems operate. But what AI introduces into the the fire, into the mix, however you might want to look at it, is this becomes a necessity. You must do these. So we need things like real-time access to the data, where the reality is, and you probably recognise this, I recognise this a lot in the systems that I build and operate internally. It's batch processing overnight. That's not good enough anymore. The data needs to be provided via structured APIs with clear contracts, so we know, what is contained within what that API is providing. Whereas currently, maybe that BI tool talks to the database directly, and they're written by people that know the schema. So that an API just does not exist at all. The data needs to be streamed so we can keep the model up to date, whereas currently the system scheduled ETL jobs daily if we're lucky. Like it might be a monthly batch processing job, so the data is stale. Version control data, I think this is a big one that's often overlooked. I see this all of the time. Like, this file gets FTP'd overnight, or somebody's downloaded it, right? I think sometimes you're lucky if these systems are automated and they just ping across this file and it's like final version 3, actually final. I've definitely named files like that before. And then a lot of these systems here, I've definitely been this person. Tribal knowledge really. It's all of this in-house knowledge is baked into these processes that involve people. And obviously we want to move towards the sorts of systems and applications over to the left there. So, moving on from that, I've got a few quick tips here, a few quick tips. So over the last few years, trying to solve some of these things, I've got some things that you might be able to take away. So the first thing here, and I quite like this one, but it is a bit tricky when we're thinking about data that is regulated, and that is to try and break down silos. So I don't know if you've worked in a department and you're sort of building an application and you find that you need data from another team over there, and you hit this. You have to put in a data access request to get access to it, right? I think a lot of us are probably familiar with this. And that involves me, as the person requesting access to that data, to justify why I need that access. And it just gets stuck in a backlog somewhere, and maybe there's a bit of back and forth and whatnot. And one hack, really, that I find is to flip that dynamic the other way round. So in the new world, the person owning the data has to justify why that data should stay siloed, why it should remain protected. Now, I'm not talking about being the Wild West here and saying, okay, let's open up all these data repositories, but it really gets the people who are owning the data to think about what data they have. Does it contain PII? Is it sensitive? Is it commercially, should it be restricted for commercial reasons and so on? And then what you may find is that there is some data that isn't particularly sensitive. The security concerns aren't there, and therefore you can widen up access to that data and more people can get access to it without that friction and barriers. So I think this is something to think about. Even if you don't wholesale implement it, it's quite tricky when we're thinking about data that's regulated, but just have this mindset of trying to flip the dynamic, I find quite useful. And then the next thing is to, I'd say, start small and strategic. So on the left, I've certainly been in projects like this. You start off by saying, okay, you know what? We've been sat on that data warehouse modernization project for years now. Let's modernize the entire data warehouse. Now it's going to take like 3 years, if you're lucky. Might not even finish the last data warehouse modernization project. Or maybe it still sits in the data center, so somebody has a bright idea of, let's take all of our data, lift it up, and stick it in the cloud. And okay, you might get some marginal benefit from there, but if you're not thinking about the quality of the data and how it's structured, you just take in a pile of junk and just moving it into the cloud, so like marginal benefit. And I think the one thing that I would say is, over the years, we've all thought and been told that data is valuable, collect data, store it forever. But actually, I think there's just a lot of noise in the data that we have, right? I'm not saying, don't collect all this data and hoard it. There is value to it, but actually, what subset of the data that you're sat on is actually valuable? And I'd say it's around about 15%. So for the stuff that you're innovating on, if you are building an agentic AI workflow, or you're doing something particularly interesting, probably only about 15% of the data that you're interested in. So rather than trying to migrate all of the data or modernize that data warehouse, actually you can just look at that small subset of data, and it's probably around about 10 to 15%, and start to focus on that. And the next thing to have a look at is then, what do you do with that data? So if any of you are doing anything with AI, you probably sort of recognize this diagram here, but essentially you've got your data sources that you start with. Might be an API, there might be some kind of batch job or whatever interface you've got, and then an embedding model, and the embedding model is to take that data and sort of transform it and sort of get it into the format and what you need necessary to work with, and put that into a vector DB. And then that serves as a knowledge base for your AI applications, and then you can use the retrieval augment model, so RAG, to then look up the data from the knowledge base and use that in your applications and sort of move it. So this is a way of sort of, without doing an incomplete data warehouse modernization project, start to take that 15% of data with an embedded model and transform it, and then put that into a vector DB, and then sort of, and then use it and build an AI application around it. And this is what we see most organizations doing. So rather than sort of, wholesale look at the whole data, there might be a data strategy initiative and warehouse project ongoing, but to, rather, you can't wait 3 years, you can start off with this. So laying those things out on a bit of a timeline, because I think, these things, some of these things you can run in parallel. Month one, looking at that critical data, what is that 10 to 15% that is valuable? A great way of doing that is to look at the sort of use case lens. So taking the time to look at use cases that are being presented internally and think about which ones are the valuable ones and are going to deliver real value. Then looking at the data that they need, and you'll find it's really tiny subset of that. Looking at the data requirements, and then the accessibility, like the accessibility and quality of that data, because that's often the barrier. So it's quite easy to start, jump in and start building a project around a use case, but if you haven't had a look at the data under the hood to underpin that, that could be the blocker. So have a look and see what the quality of the data looks like. And then from there, build a knowledge base for the use case. So on the previous diagram, taking the data and put it into a vector DB, and using that as a knowledge base for your AI application, using the RAG pattern for that, and then working towards like an MVP or kind of limited production launch. And so you can achieve that quite quickly without having to sort of consider the state of the rest of the data. And then from there, expanding on that, add more use cases on, widening the data that you're looking at, starting to break down those data silos. It's quite easy with a single use case to hone in on the data you need access to and work on that, but how do you industrialize that and take that across the org? And then scaling out the internal capability. So I think where I've seen a lot of success with this is having a team dedicated to building that use case and empowering them to work across the organization so they can go and talk to the teams that own the data. Once you've proved that with a single use case, how do you industrialize that? You can't take that and run that across the whole org, so you have to take that thinking really and take it back to the teams. And so then looking at scaling that on the longer term. So just to sort of bring it back to a few key takeaways. Going back to the survey results, the major barriers, I say, are fundamentally data problems. So it's all about security and governance and data quality and accessibility. So having a look at the state of your data, I think is really key. I think right at the start of the day in Mo's keynote, in the questions, one of the questions he answered, he did say, pointed to sort of data being a thing that you very quickly will have to look at as you start to kind of innovate and introduce AI into the stuff you're building. Then the next thing I would suggest is start breaking down silos, and because getting access to data is a problem. It's not just whether the data has an API or not, it's somebody else is going to own the data in the organization. So figuring out how you tackle that and you get access to that is key. And you could do that by flipping the default. Rather than people putting in access requests for it, maybe you have a look at the data that's there and then people justify why that needs to be siloed. Start with 15%. The other 80% of your data is probably junk, maybe. You don't need it. I'm not telling you to delete it. Definitely don't do that. Just focus on the 15%. And then the last thing is a pattern that I see work quite well is building a knowledge base, taking that 15% of the data, put it in a knowledge base, and then using the RAG pattern to do that to get some quick wins here. So, quick insight. So I've shared just a couple of data points with you. There's a lot more in the survey. This QR code here, if you scan it, that'll take you to the download page on the CTO Craft website, so you can download the survey and have a look at the results. There's some really good insights into there, and a bit more of a narrative on some of those challenges that people face. And feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or email me if you've got any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got very small amount of time for a very quick question. At the top there, can you expand more on how you can approach designing the embedded model?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I think there are lots of different options out there. I have to say I have a bit of a bias. I work a lot with AWS, and there are some off-the-shelf solutions. So we do a lot of work with AWS SageMaker, and so there are some embedding models and things out of the box that you can use there. I think one thing that I'd recommend trying just generally is to try and use some of the off-the-shelf models and components and services to prove a use case, and then once you've proved out that idea, then refine it. So, like for example, starting with one of the large language models, which is quite expensive to run in the long term, and then once you've proved out that idea, you can then fine-tune it, and then you can reduce and use simpler and cheaper models. So that's my recommendation, is to sort of start with things that are off the shelf, with services that are available, and then refine that in.
Well, we'll do this last one. Something like AWS S3 vectors, can you compress the months 1 to 3 for a RAG prototype into a couple of weeks or even days?
Oh, that's a tough question.
You've got 10 seconds.
Yeah, I would have to speak to one of our principals on this one. That's a very I tell you what, grab me afterwards, and we can have a conversation about that. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.